take it away, Ed.
I'm a little shorter, so I'll pull this down. Thank you, Jean. You're not in here right now, but thank you for putting on this great conference. And we've been here for several years at this conference, and every year I meet great people, and I learn new things. And I think it's just a really great industry space for us all to collaborate and find ways that we can work together. So this is Blue Capital. This is our company, and we increase value through sustainability. And what we really are is a consortium of companies. So a few years ago, we really realized that we don't know everything, but our friends might. So we started putting companies together and working together as a team on contracts. So we all work together on different contracts. We have sales distribution agreements with each other, and everyone has different roles and responsibilities. So we have roles from everywhere from people who are good at government relations and international government relations. We have technologists who work with us, ETA who works with us on the engineering side. We have Green Advantage, which does job development training and certification processes. We have even regenerative farming practitioners who work with us. So we all have different roles in how we play and look at project site development. I wanted to start today on something that is kind of a repeat for me when I talk to companies and customers. And there seems to be a lot of confusion on the greenhouse gas and carbon offset space. Massive amount of confusion. So when we're talking to customers or when we're talking about this, there's kind of a couple different ways people can go. One is the government-mandated, government-run marketplaces, which are often called ETS markets, so emissions, looking at emissions and reducing those. The other is the voluntary and the open carbon marketplaces. And there's so much confusion on this because the regulations around them are really ambiguous and people don't understand it. So in a nutshell, if you're going after an ETS marketplace like a European market, it's government run, government mandated, and it's heavily regulated. So meaning you need certifications, you need process in place, you have to have everything certified. It's very similar to going after tax credits here in the United States. Very similar process. If you're going after the voluntary market, it's basically whatever you can convince someone that you've done and what you can sell. It's marketing, hands down. Very low regulation around it. If you're in the open carbon market, a little more regulated, but those are regulated by private companies. So they're regulated by nonprofits. Their rules and regulations were developed by individuals or groups of individuals. They are not government regulated. So that kind of lays the marketplace out a little bit. And they have vastly different numbers that are relating to them. And there's even a lot of confusion when we see customers who receive contracts and they say, oh, I got $200 a ton for my biochar that's going as an amendment product, but then you take a look at their contract and it's over 10 years, so they're really getting $20. So there's a lot of fine print that goes into some of these things. There's a lot of confusion in the industry space, and there's even, because they're private marketplaces, overinflation because certain companies will buy a marketplace and then overinflate what they pay people for things so that everyone goes to their marketplace versus another marketplace and it all gets confused. So that's where we come in. We really try to stick with the cap and trade markets, the ETS marketplaces, because from our perspective as a company, that is the space that has the most data efficacy. And that's something that's really important to us when we're thinking about how we're going to make change in the world. And so we specialize in how we help companies enter into these cap and trade markets. One of the things that we haven't really talked a lot about here, because we talk a lot about the conversion technologies, what we like to do is have an anchor technology. And for me, an anchor technology is a gasification or a pyrolysis or a conversion technology. And then we put other technologies around it and other systems around it that are often harder to develop in their asset generation. This includes things like nature-based reductions, embodied carbon for your buildings. Little steps that add to a big whole on what is the value of your project as well as what are you doing for your reduction assets across the world. So one of the things that we work with a lot is companies who come to us because they are struggling in one aspect or another and they need some help. And so there is some things that are key things that we see that companies fail on and they go under and we don't see their names ever again. Long development timelines is a big one, where people think they can do everything themselves and they don't go out to the resources who know what they're doing and they lose months and months and months trying to figure something out. In timeline and money, time is absolutely money. And the longer that you sit on something or you don't solve a problem is the longer that you go to where you're getting financing for a project. Running out of capital, we see this all the time. Companies run out of capital, you start seeing them struggle, they don't go after the resources that get them to the next steps, and they disappear. A big one, approaching financiers before they're ready. I originally came out of academics. I have failed at this personally myself over the years. I remember my first capital raise I did, I set up a giant expo in San Francisco. I invited all of my NASA buddies, all of my academic buddies, and we showcased all of these amazing technologies, groundbreaking technologies. And I had a financer come up to me and he's like, all right, what's your gross margins? I had no idea. This was like 20 years ago, so it was a long time ago. So big difference from today then. But the reality is a lot of us, when we transition from being engineers or scientists, do not understand finance because we've never been taught it in school. And so when we think about these things, we have to make sure that we are ready before we go to financiers, because most of the time you have one shot. You answer a question wrong, you're too risky. You don't have your numbers ready, you're not ready. You give them a project development finance sheet instead of a pro forma, you're not ready. They ignore you. And you're done. There's no going back. Incomplete due diligence documents. This can be a real inhibiting factor. We see a lot of technologies or companies that are giving the wrong information, and if you don't have appropriate due diligence documents, you're not going to either pass any of your certifications or your permitting, or even if you go after government financing, it will be uncovered very quickly in that due diligence process that they require. So that's something I really emphasize in needs. Technology provider choice, same as a little bit in the due diligence. You have the wrong tech provider who gives you the wrong information, that's the end of it. And I've personally been on the end of that. So these are personal experiences, not just observations. Communication. Engineers and scientists were not normally communicators. So we can get lost in the weeds of our technology and maybe not communicate it appropriately to financiers or investors who really need that 30-second pitch and don't have the bandwidth for anything more. Technical readiness level, we see a lot of companies who say, yes, I'm going to industrialization, and they haven't even made a TRL-7 yet in their technical readiness. And if they're not there, financiers are not going to finance that project. And technical feasibility assessments, same deal. It's not just the technology, it's the location that you're at, it's the feedstock that you have, it's what's going in, what's coming out, how are you going to transport that product, how are you going to deliver that product. All of those things go into your full package. If it's not there, you're not getting money. So I'm going to go through 5 different things that I think are major players in a finance stack that are needed. The first we're going to go through very quickly is a master plan stack, and then we'll talk a little bit about performance. And this is a really important piece all over the board for projects. Financeable contract templates and legal support, your offtake purchase, feedstock, distribution, real estate, tax equity, and cap and trade accounting, and third-party technical reviews. So let's start with like the master plan carbon stack package. So every little piece that you do that goes into your project puts into a calculation, whether it's energy or whether it's carbon, or if you're doing your diversion credits, it all goes into this. So you need to know your waste input materials really well. You have to know your feedstock, end products, process train efficiencies. A lot of process trains that we work with are super energy intensive, or they emit contaminants that aren't being appropriately scrubbed. Project site placement is a big deal of this. Too close to coastal zones, too close to people. Any of those things can make a project go awry. Embodied carbon, stable landscape, sustainable landscaping. Most people don't think about those things, but even in your wastewater ponds, you can be reducing your emissions in your wastewater ponds. Even next to the ocean, you can be collecting contaminants out of the ocean with bioremediation systems that will increase your overall reduction assets. Embodied carbon, there's a lot of really good buildings on the market now that will reduce both your energy consumption on your facility, reducing your overall operational costs, while reducing your greenhouse gas emissions. And your export of product. How is it going to be transported? Are you going to use rail? Are you going to use truck? Are you using ship? A lot of these go into the key indicators of project development. And then many of you have probably seen here your choices in some of your reduction assets, whether they're going to be a scope 1, a scope 2, or a scope 3 reduction. If you're going after the emission trading system markets, they really need to be a scope 1 or 2. Scope 3, which is where a lot of people sit, really heavily sits in the voluntary market and sometimes in the open carbon market. So it's just things to think about when you're doing your project planning and where you put the emphasis on your development. So by the numbers, I cannot tell you how many people send me a performa that is not a performa. They send me a project finance document. They are two separate things. They do not belong in the same place at all. And I can't emphasize that enough, because if a financer sees a project finance package like you would send to a government agency and it's not a performa, you're done. They will not look at you. So this is a very basic one, like a front page snapshot. And we're going to dig in a little bit. So on the finance perspective side, financiers look at performance differently than you do. You probably look at that bottom line, or you're making sure that you don't have a hockey puck. That's actually not the things that they look for. They look for it a little bit, but they're looking at who has control of your project. How are they going to make their money back, and how quickly are they going to make their money back? Most financiers want their money back in 5 years, period. Then you're going to look at your rate of return. So how much of this is coming from the debt or the money that's coming into the project, and how much of it is actually the financeability of your project because of what you've put together. And then almost everybody will take a quick shot at the cost of goods sold. That's a good health indicator of your business. And I personally, I don't look at EBITDA as much as I look at gross margins. Gross margins for me is a #1 indicator of health of a financial package. But underneath a very nice looking front page is where it gets murky. So I look at cash flow, and so do most financiers. If you have any red in your cash flow, fix it now. It's a big red light. It's something that people look at and go, we're not moving forward. There's risk here because the cash flow isn't consistent. And it's often missed by people putting these things together. As a financer, I also look at directly, do the project numbers make sense? So are the inputs going in making sense to the outputs that they're presenting? And so I always look at a quick view of these. And so when you put together a performa, make sure that this is ready for your financiers, because they want to see this. They want to make sure that these project numbers actually make sense. Number 3, financial contracts. So most people that are in our industry space worry about what's in their bank. And I don't worry about that. I wonder what's in your contracts. Because if your contracts don't make sense, your project isn't financeable. So you have to look at your offtake contracts for your feedstock. So you need feedstock. Feedstock, you have to be assured of your feedstock for a long period of time. Most of your projects are going to be a 20-year period, so you need to have secure feedstock for that period of time or you don't move forward. Offtake contracts. This gets tricky. You can't just sell to anybody. Much better if you have 1 or 2 singular contracts with AAA rated companies. If you don't have that, or if they're B or C rated, it makes you much lower on the financeability scale with contractors and with financiers. Technology, has it been insured? Are there warranties on it? This is like if all hell goes wrong, can the financer go in and take all your equipment and still deal with it? Do they have someone to go after if there's been problems? These are the de-risking mechanisms that financiers look for. Site selection. Incentives. Did you do your due diligence on your incentive packages? There are many out there, including things like no taxes for a set number of years to go into different states, job development training incentive packages, site packages, opportunity zones, you name it, there's a ton of incentives, and that needs to be part of your equity package. Real estate and real assets. So one thing I've seen before, I worked with a company and they had already given away through debt financing the first right of refusal on their real estate. They're done. You're not going to get debt financing on the rest of your project because you gave away the big part of your asset that the big money is looking for. So they went after the small money and gave away their biggest asset, and then they were stuck because they had nothing else to leverage the debt they needed for their larger scale development. Are there verified ETS credits or attestations? So these create equity on paper, and when you combine them with other assets like insurability of your program or of your equipment, then you can go after things like securities bonds and things like that. So combining some of these assets on paper increase your viability in different kinds of financing as well as traditional bank financing. So we were very lucky in our industry. We did well with the US IRS tax incentives coming out this year. So tax equity is still on the table for us, so we can all applaud and be happy because that was kind of a shaky ground for us. But we came out on a good end on this, especially on the agricultural side. So these are all things that are very qualifiable things to bring in other kinds of investment that people don't often think about, which is tax equity investment. And it's just a different mechanism of financing a project versus, say, bank financing or bringing in other kinds of investors. And it has low risk to the people who are putting these developments together because the tax equity investors come in for a set period of time and then they exit. So you're not giving away huge chunks of your company up, you're just keeping it in there for a short period of time. So cap and trade markets as an investment opportunity. So we're looking that just the EU ETS will be $750 billion over the next 4 to 5 years. So when we think about markets and where market entry is, we have to pre-plan where we're going to put our greenhouse gas reduction asset emphasis. Are we going to do it into the voluntary market? Are we going to do it into the open carbon market? Or are we going to go that extra step and be into the ETS? Right now, today, it's about 74 euros a ton for CO2e reduction equivalencies, but they predict that this will cap out at about 150. So it's increasing and increasing yearly as there's more restrictions. And the EU ETS is not the only one out there. There's the Japanese markets, there's the Canadian markets, there's California, there's Washington markets, there's Chinese markets, there's different ones like our taxation, like in Singapore. So there's markets now opening up all over the world on emission trading. Technology is a minefield. This is a tough one, guys, but I think many of us here have been personally burned by this. There are a lot of promises out there, and unfortunately, because there's been a lot of promises and massive failures in our industry, financiers are very, very conservative. New is not sexy anymore. New is incredibly hard to finance. So this is just something for us to keep in mind, that it's been a hard place. And so people who are bringing out new technologies onto the marketplace have to go above and beyond what they used to prove that that technology works. The last package that I worked with, the financiers required that the facilities that they looked at had been in operation for 10 plus years. That's a big hurdle. 10 years of operation before they would finance the deal structure that big. And granted, it was a big deal structure, but they wanted that threshold before they'd move forward. The other thing is they're really conservative in how much growth there is. There really is a tight, at least with most of the financiers I work with, a 20% margin of growth between an industrialized system and what you have there. They don't mind if you daisy chain, that's fine, but they do mind if you go from a very tiny pilot system and increase it by 90 to 100%. That's a no-go for most of them. Studies that provide important guidance. I can't say enough about really going through the process of doing your gap analyses, doing your risk assessments, going through at least the first FEL assessments and feed studies. These all provide you valuable insight for a roadmap of where your company is going and what you can do to save time and money in your development process. If you don't do these, you will run into issues. But you don't have to go so far as spending millions and millions of dollars on all of these. We've run into companies who have spent all of their capital that they brought in from investors on these technical due diligence, millions of dollars on them. And the honest truth is it was way above and beyond what the financiers wanted, needed, or would even look at. 200 plus page documents, leave that for government financing and government debt. Do not do that for the private finance capital world. Project site placement. This is a big deal. You put your project in the wrong place, you think about it wrong. Like, when we look through finance packages, we look at, are there hurricanes that are going to affect the project site? Is there earthquakes that are going to take out your facility? What is the average rainflow? Are you going to have people that can actually run the facility? So it's not just about like, hey, I've got a blank piece of property here and I'm going to put my facility here. There's a lot of ins and outs that go into that project site adjustment and placement and thought, and financiers will dig it out in due diligence. So you need to either put that information in front of them right away or figure it out before you put your project on a site. And then carbon stack creates huge value. So I think of carbon stack the same way I think of tax incentive stacks. I don't know how many of you work in the tax incentive space, but they stack on each other. So if you're in, say, a tax incentive, you've got an opportunity zone, that's one. If you're in an energy community census tract, that's another stack. If you're in a brownfield site, that's another stack. And if you do it right, you can get up to 40 to 50% diversion on your capital gains very, very quickly. If you don't take advantage of those things, that's a lot of money you're leaving on the table. It's the same with creating your greenhouse gas stacks. So you have your technology, that's your primary center core store of your stack. And then you put in your embodied carbon of your building, and you put on your transport of your product coming in and going out. You stack these things up and they make a huge difference. Import versus export and build to print. In the technology side. This becomes a really interesting finance question. Financiers like to know that you have a manufacturing partner who is really consistent. Consistency is key and it de-risks the entire thing. If you're going and piecemealing your technology a little bit here from one small manufacturer to another, and you haven't really had consistent manufacturing of all of your equipment, there is a high likelihood of failure of critical key components. The other piece of this, if you're importing too much from other countries, you're going to be impacted by tariffs. You're going to be impacted by being able to get replacement parts. If your equipment goes down, you need to have those all in your budgets and financials and ready to go, because any downtime on your equipment means money left on the table. And then last but not least, audited certifications. A lot of people don't think so much in our industry base, but they do a little bit on the ISO 9001s and best business practices. But audited certifications are a really good example of how you de-risk everything in your business. And for a lot of those certifications with your ETS markets, you need to have parts of them in place anyway to even get your ETS credits. So these are things that I think are fairly important to start not having right away, but to start having a plan in your performance and budget to have them done. And I'll tell you, they are not fun documents to write. They are horribly, horribly boring to write. But they are necessary, and honestly, they're going to make your whole facility and your business run very smoothly, which is why they call them best business practices. So our goal is to help communities by giving them the tools to generate sustainable, positive changes for themselves. So we work in a space where we help a lot of companies, but our own developments, we're doing things called employee-owned, employee-operated businesses. And we're doing that because we want to create generational wealth and build economies at scale. And the outcome for what we do is a tool set for repeating this model in other communities across the world for meeting environmental and economic goals. But the whole The whole thing that makes us run is a financeable package. If you don't have a financeable package, it's a no-go. And I know that's a hard place to sit because we're technologists at heart, and we know our technology works, and we know that we've got really great things going. But financiers look at it from a very different perspective, and it's all about risk to them. And if your project or your technology is risky at all, they will say thank you, but no thank you. And it's because they're dealing with large amounts of money, they're dealing with people with high pressure, and it's expensive for them to fail, massively expensive. So if you'd like to get a hold of us or talk to us about any of your projects or have any questions for me, happy to help in any way. But that's it. So thanks, everyone.